The bagpiper's haunting melody stopped mid-note, his weathered fingers frozen on the chanter as 200 mourners turned in stunned silence. There, emerging from the pine shadows of Yellowstone's Lamar Valley, padded a massive mountain lion, 180 pounds of raw wilderness, walking directly toward the open casket of Samuel Mackenzie. It wasn't just any cougar. This was spirit. Gasps rippled through the crowd like wildfire. A woman's prayer book hit the frozen ground with a sharp crack. Children pressed closer to their parents, wide eyes tracking the predator's deliberate approach toward the man who had raised him from an orphaned cub 15 years ago. Doctor. 6 months earlier, Samuel Mackenzie had been a man marking time until death. At 72, the retired park ranger lived alone in a weather-beaten cabin that squatted like a forgotten prayer at the edge of Yellowstone's Lamar Valley. The mortgage company's letters arrived with the regularity of seasons, red ink bleeding across white paper, demanding property taxes he couldn't pay on a pension stretched thinner than mountain air. Sam's days followed the same ritual. Black coffee at dawn, checking the empty mailbox for letters that never came, and sitting on his porch watching the valley where he'd spent 47 years protecting wildlife from poachers, tourists, and developers. The silence was his only companion now. Dorothy had been gone 5 years, claimed by Alzheimer's that stole her memories before it stole her breath. Their son Tommy lay buried beneath Afghan soil for 15 years, his bronze star gathering dust on Sam's mantle next to a photo of a boy who'd never grow old. "Another day above ground, Dorothy," Sam would whisper to his wife's empty rocking chair each morning, the same words he'd spoken since her funeral. Got to count for something. The cabin held 43 years of marriage in its pine walls, Dorothy's quilts still folded in cedar chests, Tommy's high school football trophies on dusty shelves, and Christmas ornaments they'd never unwrap again. Sam moved through these memories like a ghost haunting his own life, surviving on canned soup and stubbornness. Dr. Margaret Thompson arrived in Montana that spring, like an answer to a prayer nobody had prayed. At 68, she was a wildlife biologist fleeing her own ghosts, a 40-year marriage that ended when her husband decided retirement meant 25-year-old secretaries and red sports cars. She'd rented a small research station 3 miles from Sam's cabin, ostensibly to study mountain lion behavior patterns, but really to disappear into work that mattered more than the wreckage of her personal life. Maggie had steel-gray hair she refused to dye, laugh lines earned through decades of outdoor research, and the kind of loneliness that recognized itself in others. She drove a battered Jeep Cherokee with 200,000 miles and a back seat full of scientific equipment that couldn't measure the ache in her chest when her son Billy called, if he called, from his law office in New York. Then there was the man who called himself Marcus Volkov, though that name fit him like an expensive suit worn to a barn dance. 35 years old, with sharp eyes and sharper business cards, he'd appeared in Lamar Valley 6 months ago representing something called Mountain Vista Development. He wore city clothes that had never seen honest dirt and spoke of maximizing land potential while eyeing Sam's property like a wolf sizing up wounded prey. Marcus carried briefcases full of legal documents and offered buyout prices that sounded generous until you realized they'd barely cover a year's rent in any decent nursing home. There was something familiar about his jawline, something that made Sam's chest tighten with memories he couldn't quite place. None of them knew their lives were about to intersect with a mountain lion who would challenge everything they believed about love, loyalty, and the bonds that transcend species. The morning Sam Mackenzie's life changed forever began like any other, with bitter coffee and the kind of silence that makes old men talk to themselves. He was checking his fence line near Soda Butte Creek when he heard it, a sound that froze his blood and sent him running despite his 72-year-old knees. The kitten's cries cut through the September air like a blade, not a house cat's mewing, but the desperate wail of something wild and dying, Sam crashed through the underbrush, following the sound to a clearing where his worst fears materialized in steel and blood. The illegal leg-hold trap had done its work with merciless efficiency. A female mountain lion lay twisted in death, her magnificent tawny coat matted with dried blood, her powerful legs frozen in a final struggle against the metal teeth that had claimed her life. But it was the movement beside her that stopped Sam's heart. A tiny cub, no more than 8 weeks old, nudging his mother's still form with increasing desperation. "Jesus Christ," Sam whispered, dropping to his knees. The cub looked up at him with eyes the color of winter sky, an impossible blue-gray that Sam had never seen in a cougar. The little creature was emaciated, dehydrated, and covered in his mother's blood. His left ear bore a fresh tear from his own struggles against a smaller trap that had mercifully released him. Sam knew the protocol. Call Fish and Wildlife. Let the professionals handle it. Wild animals belonged in the wild, and interfering with nature was against every regulation he'd enforced for nearly 5 decades. But as the cub stumbled toward him on unsteady legs, collapsing against Sam's boots with a pitiful mew, protocol seemed as meaningless as the morning mist. "Aw, hell," Sam breathed, scooping the tiny predator into gentle hands. The cub weighed maybe 4 pounds, all ribs and oversized paws, and those haunting eyes that seemed to look straight through to Sam's soul. "What am I supposed to do with you, little fella?" The answer came in Tommy's voice, echoing across 15 years of grief. "Dad, remember when I found that baby raccoon? You said sometimes the rules don't matter as much as doing what's right." Sam carried the cub home wrapped in his flannel shirt, every step a choice between duty and compassion. In his kitchen he prepared a mixture of goat's milk and raw egg, the same formula he'd used for Tommy's endless parade of injured creatures. The cub latched onto the makeshift bottle with desperate hunger, tiny claws kneading Sam's weathered hands as he fed. "What the hell are you doing, Mackenzie?" he muttered to himself as the cub curled up in a cardboard box lined with Dorothy's old quilts. "You're harboring a federally protected predator. You could lose your pension, your land, everything." But when those impossible blue eyes looked up at him with complete trust, Sam knew he was already lost. For 2 weeks, Sam lived like a criminal in his own home. He fed the cub every 3 hours, cleaned his makeshift den, and watched him grow stronger with each passing day. The little mountain lion, Sam had started calling him Spirit for those ethereal eyes, began following him around the cabin like an oversized house cat, purring with a rumble that vibrated through Sam's chest when he slept curled against the old man's side. The secret might have lasted longer if Dr. Margaret Thompson hadn't chosen that particular morning to knock on Sam's door. "Mr. Mackenzie?" Maggie called, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being listened to. "I'm Dr. Thompson from the research station." "I was hoping to ask you about mountain lion activity in the area." Sam opened the door just wide enough to peer out, trying to block her view of the cabin interior. Behind him, Spirit chose that exact moment to let out a demanding yowl that no amount of coughing could disguise. Maggie's eyebrows shot up toward her steel-gray hairline. "Was that?" Television," Sam lied badly. "Nature documentary. Very loud." The lie might have worked if Spirit hadn't chosen that moment to dart between Sam's legs and straight toward the interesting stranger. Maggie stared in shock at the now 12-pound mountain lion cub who sat at her feet and looked up at her with those remarkable blue eyes. "Mr. Mackenzie," she said slowly, her scientific mind cataloging every illegal aspect of the situation. "We need to talk." Sam sighed, defeated. "I suppose we do. Coffee?" As Maggie followed him into the cabin where Tommy's photos watched from the mantel and Dorothy's quilts lined a cougar's bed, neither of them noticed the black sedan parked on the ridge above, where Marcus Volkov lowered his binoculars with a cold smile. The old man had just handed him the perfect leverage to force a sale. The game, as they say, was about to begin. Dr. Margaret Thompson sat at Sam Mackenzie's kitchen table watching a mountain lion cub play with a ball of yarn while her entire worldview crumbled like stale bread. Spirit, she couldn't help but think of him by the name Sam used, had claimed her lap as his personal throne, purring with the volume of a small motorcycle engine while she absent-mindedly scratched behind his torn ear. 40 years of wildlife research, she murmured, and I've never seen anything like this. Sam poured coffee into mismatched mugs, his movements careful around the cub, who now treated the cabin like his personal kingdom. He's not like other cougars, that's for sure. Look at those eyes. Never seen blue in a mountain lion before. And the way he learns things. Sam trailed off, watching Spirit demonstrate his latest trick, opening cabinet doors by hanging from the handles. "This is impossible, you know," Maggie said, though her tone held more wonder than reproach. "Cougars are solitary by nature. They don't bond with humans like this. They certainly don't purr like house cats or play with yarn balls." "Tell him that," Sam chuckled, then grew serious. "Doc, I know what this looks like. I know what I should have done. But when I found him next to his mama's body crying like his heart was broken," his voice caught, "I couldn't just walk away." Maggie studied the old man's weathered face, seeing echoes of her own loneliness in the lines around his eyes. "How long has it been since you lost someone, Sam?" The question hit like a physical blow. Sam's hand instinctively went to the gold wedding band he still wore, turning it slowly. "My wife Dorothy, 5 years last month, Alzheimer's, and before that my boy Tommy, IED in Afghanistan, 15 years ago. He was 22. "I'm sorry," Maggie whispered, understanding flooding through her. Her own divorce seemed trivial compared to Sam's losses. "My husband left me last year for his secretary. 40 years of marriage, and I got a text message while I was in the field studying wolf packs in Alaska." They sat in companionable silence, two broken souls finding solace in shared pain and an impossible mountain lion who seemed to sense their need for comfort. Spirit moved from Maggie's lap to Sam's, then back again, as if he understood his role as emotional bridge between the lonely humans. "We have to make this official somehow," Maggie said finally. "I have research permits. Maybe I can claim I'm studying unusual cougar behavior patterns, document his development, his social bonding capabilities, turn this into legitimate science." Sam's eyes lit with hope for the first time in months. "You'd do that? Risk your career for a crazy old man and his pet mountain lion?" "He's not a pet," Maggie corrected, watching Spirit demonstrate his ability to open the refrigerator. "He's something entirely different. Something that could change everything we think we know about human-animal relationships." Their partnership might have developed slowly, carefully, if not for the sharp knock that shattered the afternoon quiet. Sam and Maggie exchanged panicked glances as Spirit, now 15 pounds of growing predator, padded curiously toward the door. "Mr. Mackenzie?" The voice was smooth, professional, with just a hint of threat. "Marcus Volkov, Mountain Vista Development. I believe we have some business to discuss." Sam scooped Spirit into his arms, the cub protesting with soft chirps. "Back room," he whispered to Maggie, who quickly gathered her research notes. "Stay quiet, both of you." Sam opened the door to find Marcus Volkov examining his property with the calculating gaze of a man pricing livestock. Up close, Marcus was younger than his telephone voice suggested, maybe 35, with dark hair and sharp features that triggered an uncomfortable memory Sam couldn't quite place. "Beautiful property," Marcus said without preamble, 43 acres of prime development land, though the cabin's seen better days. I trust you received my offer? I did. Sam kept his body blocking the doorway. Also told your secretary I'm not interested in selling. Marcus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Times change, Mr. Mackenzie. Property taxes are going up. Maintenance costs on a place this old must be substantial. My company is prepared to offer you enough to live comfortably in a nice senior community, much safer than being isolated out here. I appreciate the concern, but I'm fine where I am. Are you? Marcus pulled out a tablet, swiping to display official-looking documents. According to county records, you're 3 months behind on property taxes. The state of this fence line suggests you can't afford basic maintenance. And then there are other concerns. The way Marcus said other concerns made Sam's blood run cold. From the back room came a soft thud, Spirit jumping down from something, and Marcus's head tilted slightly. Interesting wildlife you have around here, Marcus continued conversationally. I've been observing the area for several months. Remarkable what you can see with a good pair of binoculars from the ridge. Mountain lions, for instance. Dangerous predators. The kind that might pose a threat to public safety if they became too comfortable around human habitation. Sam's heart hammered against his ribs. I don't know what you're implying. I'm not implying anything, Mr. Mackenzie. I'm stating facts. Mountain Vista Development has a responsibility to ensure any land we acquire is free of complications, environmental hazards, endangered species violations, illegal wildlife interactions, the kind of violations that could result in federal charges, substantial fines, and immediate seizure of property. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Sam gripped the doorframe to steady himself, feeling every one of his 72 years. What exactly are you saying? Marcus's smile turned predatory. I'm saying that some problems can be made to disappear with the right kind of cooperation. My offer stands for another 2 weeks. After that, well, public safety concerns might force me to contact the appropriate federal agencies. He turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Mr. Mackenzie, that young mountain lion you've been harboring, he's going to grow up to be a 200-pound apex predator. Ask yourself if you really want that kind of responsibility on your conscience when he inevitably hurts someone. As Marcus's sedan disappeared down the dirt road, Sam slumped against the doorframe. Maggie emerged from the back room with Spirit in her arms, both of them having heard every word. He knows, Sam said unnecessarily. Yes, Maggie replied, her scientific mind already working on solutions. But we have 2 weeks. 2 weeks to figure out how to protect Spirit and keep you out of federal prison. Spirit looked between his 2 human protectors with those impossible blue eyes, purring softly as if he understood that his very existence had just become the center of a dangerous game. None of them knew how to win. The mountain lion that emerged from the forest 3 months later bore little resemblance to the starving cub Sam had rescued. Spirit now weighed 60 pounds of solid muscle and wild grace, his coat a rich tawny gold that caught sunlight like spun copper. Those distinctive blue-gray eyes held an intelligence that made Maggie question everything she'd learned about animal cognition in 4 decades of research. He's demonstrating problem-solving abilities that shouldn't exist in solitary predators, Maggie told Sam as they watched Spirit manipulate a complex puzzle box she'd designed. The young cougar worked methodically, using his claws to slide wooden panels in sequence until the hidden treat compartment opened. Social animals like primates and dolphins show this kind of reasoning, but mountain lions? Never. Sam leaned against the cabin's porch railing, pride evident in his weathered features. Tommy was the same way as a boy. Could take apart any mechanical thing and put it back together. Had this way with animals, too. They just trusted him. The comparison wasn't lost on either of them. Spirit had bonded with Sam in ways that defied scientific explanation, following him on daily patrols of the property, responding to verbal commands, even exhibiting what appeared to be emotional empathy when Sam's arthritis flared on cold mornings. The cougar would curl up beside the old man's chair, purring with therapeutic vibrations that seemed to ease the pain. But it was Spirit's protective instincts that truly set him apart from wild cougars. The first demonstration came on a crisp October morning when a massive black bear wandered into Sam's yard, drawn by the scent of garbage. Sam was splitting firewood, his back turned, when 300 pounds of hungry bruin decided the old man might be easier prey than rummaging through trash cans. The bear's charge was silent, powerful, and potentially lethal. Sam never saw it coming. Spirit did. The young mountain lion materialized from the tree line like golden lightning, placing himself between Sam and the advancing bear with a snarl that froze both man and beast. At 60 pounds, Spirit was dwarfed by the bear, but he showed no fear, arching his back and hissing with the fury of something willing to die, protecting what he loved. The standoff lasted 30 eternal seconds before the bear, perhaps recognizing the depth of Spirit's commitment, huffed dismissively and lumbered away. Sam stood trembling, axe forgotten in his hands, watching his unlikely protector gradually relax as the threat disappeared. "Good God," he whispered, dropping to his knees as Spirit padded over for reassurance. "You could have been killed, you crazy cat." Spirit simply butted his head against Sam's chest and purred as if saving his human's life was the most natural thing in the world. When Maggie arrived an hour later and heard the story, her excitement was palpable. "This changes everything we know about mountain lion behavior," she said, fingers flying over her laptop keyboard as she documented the incident. "Cougars don't engage in altruistic behavior. They don't risk their lives for other species. What Spirit did today, it's unprecedented." But their celebration was short-lived. As if summoned by their growing confidence, Marcus Volkov's sedan appeared on the ridge that afternoon, binoculars glinting in his hands. The message was clear. He was watching, waiting, gathering evidence. The psychological pressure began to tell on Sam. Sleep became elusive, interrupted by dreams of federal agents, cages, and Spirit's trusting eyes behind metal bars. His morning coffee tasted like ash, and his hands developed a tremor that had nothing to do with age. The weight of protecting Spirit while hiding from Marcus felt like carrying stones in his chest. "I can't keep living like this," Sam confessed to Maggie one evening as they watched Spirit hunt mice in the tall grass with the focused intensity of his wild heritage. "Every car that drives by, every knock on the door, I think it's the end. For both of us." Maggie had been struggling with her own demons. Her research on Spirit was groundbreaking, the kind of discovery that could make careers and rewrite textbooks. But publishing it would expose Sam to federal prosecution and Spirit to certain captivity. The ethical implications kept her awake at night, staring at data that could change the world but might destroy the lives of those she'd grown to love. "There has to be another way," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. "Some legal avenue we haven't explored." Their answer came from an unexpected source, Spirit himself. It was Maggie who first noticed the pattern. Every morning, Spirit would disappear for exactly 2 hours, returning with dirt on his paws and pine needles in his coat. When they followed him one day, maintaining careful distance, they discovered his destination, a hidden cave system in the rocky outcropping behind Sam's property. The caves were larger than they'd expected, a natural cathedral carved from limestone by centuries of water flow. But it was the walls that stole their breath. Painted in earth pigments that had somehow survived decades of weather were dozens of images, mountain lions, elk, bears, and human figures living in harmony. The artwork was clearly Native American, probably Crow or Blackfeet, dating back at least a century. "This is a sacred site," Maggie whispered, her archaeologist's training overriding her wildlife expertise. The tribal elders would want to know about this. It could be protected under the National Historic Preservation Act. Sam knelt beside one painting that showed a human figure with hands outstretched toward a mountain lion, both surrounded by symbols that seemed to represent protection and kinship. Maybe that's what Spirit's been trying to show us. That this land, this connection, it's not new. It's old, older than our laws and regulations. The discovery gave them hope, but hope required time they didn't have. Marcus's pressure was intensifying daily. Official-looking surveyors appeared on the property boundaries. Environmental assessment teams asked pointed questions about wildlife sightings. The net was closing. Meanwhile, Spirit continued to grow, both physically and in his attachment to Sam. Now weighing close to 80 pounds, he was approaching the size where his protective instincts could become genuinely dangerous to anyone who threatened his chosen family. Maggie documented incident after incident. Spirit chasing off aggressive dogs, positioning himself between Sam and strangers, even following at a distance when Sam drove into town for supplies. He's bonding deeper every day, Maggie noted in her research journal. The longer this continues, the harder it will be to separate them without psychological trauma to both species. The crisis she feared came sooner than expected. It was a Tuesday morning in November, the first snow dusting the mountain peaks, when animal control officers arrived at Sam's door. Marcus Volkov stood behind them, his expensive coat stark against the wilderness backdrop, satisfaction evident in his cold smile. "Mr. Mackenzie," the lead officer announced, "we have reports of illegal wildlife interaction on this property. We're authorized to search the premises and confiscate any protected animals being held without proper permits." Sam's heart hammered as he blocked the doorway. Inside, Spirit was sleeping on Tommy's old bed, utterly trusting in the safety of their shared home. "I don't know what you're talking about. This is private property." "Not for much longer," Marcus interjected smoothly. "The property taxes you're behind on come to $14,000, Mr. Mackenzie. The county auction is scheduled for next month unless you can pay in full. My company is prepared to settle your debt in exchange for a clean sale." The trap was perfect, elegant in its cruelty. Marcus had orchestrated every element: the financial pressure, the legal threats, the timing. Even if Sam could somehow hide Spirit during the search, the mountain lion would be homeless within weeks when the property changed hands. "You son of a bitch," Sam whispered, seeing his whole world crumbling. Behind him, Spirit appeared in the hallway, drawn by the tension in his human's voice. The young cougar's hackles rose as he sensed danger, those impossible blue eyes fixed on the strangers at his door. The animal control officers reached for their tranquilizer equipment as Spirit padded closer to Sam, his protective instincts overriding caution. In that moment, watching his beloved companion prepare to defend him against impossible odds, Sam Mackenzie made the hardest decision of his life. "Wait," he said, his voice breaking. "I'll cooperate. Just give me a minute to say goodbye." As the officers prepared their capture equipment and Marcus Volkov smiled his cold victory, none of them noticed the black Jeep Cherokee parked just out of sight on the Forest Service Road, where Dr. Margaret Thompson sat with her cell phone pressed to her ear, speaking rapidly to contacts at the Smithsonian Institution, the National Geographic Society, and 3 different tribal councils. The game wasn't over yet. The betrayal cut deeper than any winter wind that had ever howled through Lamar Valley. Sam Mackenzie knelt in his living room, Spirit's massive head resting in his weathered hands, trying to find words that could somehow explain why the one person the mountain lion trusted completely was about to hand him over to strangers with cages and tranquilizer guns. "I'm sorry, son," Sam whispered, his voice breaking on the word that had slipped out unconsciously. Spirit's blue-gray eyes searched his face with an intelligence that made the moment even more heartbreaking. The young cougar sensed betrayal in the air like the scent of an approaching storm. But his trust in Sam remained absolute. "I'm so damn sorry." Through the window, Sam could see the animal control van, its metal cage gleaming in the weak November sunlight like an instrument of torture. Marcus Volkov stood beside it, checking his expensive watch with the patience of a man who had already won. The officers were professional, efficient, discussing tranquilizer dosages and transport protocols with the clinical detachment of veterinarians putting down a beloved pet. "We need to move quickly," the lead officer called through the door. "Weather reports show a storm system moving in from the northwest. If we don't get the animal secured and transported within the next 4 hours, we'll have to wait until it passes." Sam's hands trembled as he stroked Spirit's coat, memorizing the texture of fur that had grown from kitten soft to the coarse guard hairs of a mature predator. At 85 pounds, Spirit was still growing, still learning, still becoming the magnificent creature he was meant to be. In captivity, that growth would be stunted, that wild spirit broken by concrete walls and feeding schedules. "Time's up, Mr. Mackenzie," Marcus called, his voice carrying the satisfaction of complete victory. "Let's not make this harder than it has to be." The next few minutes unfolded like a nightmare in slow motion. Sam clipped a rope around Spirit's neck, the first restraint the mountain lion had ever worn, and led him outside into the yard where his whole world waited to collapse. Spirit followed trustingly, even as his wild instincts screamed warnings about the cage, the strangers, the fundamental wrongness of everything happening around him. "Easy, boy," one of the officers murmured, raising the tranquilizer gun. "This won't hurt much." But Spirit's survival instincts, dormant through months of domestic comfort, suddenly blazed to life. As the dart gun fired, he twisted away with reflexes honed by 10,000 generations of mountain lion DNA. The dart grazed his shoulder, delivering only a partial dose as he bolted toward the tree line with Sam's rope trailing behind him. "Damn it!" The officer chambered another dart. "He's only got half a dose." "He'll be confused, disoriented, but still dangerous." "Then track him down," Marcus snapped, his careful plan beginning to unravel. "I want that animal secured today." What followed was a farce that would have been comedic if the stakes weren't so desperately high. 3 animal control officers, armed with tranquilizer guns and years of training, stumbled through the Montana wilderness chasing an 85-pound mountain lion who knew every tree, every rock, every hiding place within 10 square miles. Spirit, groggy from the partial tranquilizer but running on pure adrenaline, led them on a chase that lasted 3 hours and covered rough terrain that left the city-soft officers exhausted and frustrated. Sam watched from his porch, his heart breaking with every distant shout, every glimpse of tawny fur disappearing into shadows. This was what he had feared most. Spirit confused, frightened, separated from everything familiar and safe. The mountain lion's distress calls echoed across the valley like accusations, each one a knife through Sam's conscience. As afternoon light began to fade, the storm system the officers had worried about arrived with vindictive fury. Snow began falling in thick, heavy flakes that reduced visibility to mere yards. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in an hour, and the wind began to howl through the pine trees with voices that sounded almost human. "We have to call it off," the lead officer announced, trudging back to the van with defeat written across his frost-bitten features. "Animal's got maybe 4 hours of partial sedation left in his system. In this weather, trying to track him would be suicide for all of us." Marcus Volkov's carefully controlled facade finally cracked. "This is unacceptable. That animal is a public safety hazard. You can't just leave it running around loose." "Sir, with respect, Mother Nature just gave us our marching orders," the officer replied, packing his equipment with the weary efficiency of someone who'd learned not to argue with Wyoming weather. We'll be back when the storm passes. Meantime, that cat's going to be focused on survival, not bothering anybody. As the van disappeared into the swirling snow, Marcus turned his fury on Sam. "This is your fault, old man. Your illegal pet, your problem. When that thing kills someone, and it will, their blood is on your hands." But Sam was no longer listening. Spirit was out there in the storm, confused and alone, with enough tranquilizer in his system to impair his judgment, but not enough to put him to sleep. In weather that was already claiming the lives of experienced outdoorsmen, a disoriented mountain lion had virtually no chance of survival. "I have to find him," Sam said, more to himself than to Marcus. "Don't be ridiculous," Marcus snapped. "You're 72 years old. You'd freeze to death in an hour." Sam looked at the younger man with eyes that held 47 years of wilderness experience and a grandfather's desperate love. "Then I guess we'll freeze together." Against every voice of reason, every survival instinct honed by decades in the mountains, Sam Mackenzie pulled on his heaviest coat, grabbed a backpack full of emergency supplies, and walked into the storm that was already being called the worst November blizzard in 20 years. Behind him, Marcus Volkov stood in the swirling snow, watching his carefully orchestrated plan collapse into chaos, and for the first time in months, his expression held something that might have been respect. The wind hit Sam like a physical blow, driving snow into his face with stinging force. Visibility dropped to nothing within minutes, the familiar landscape of his property becoming an alien moonscape of white confusion. But Sam pressed on, following the faint depression of Spirit's tracks until even those were erased by the relentless snowfall. "Spirit!" he called, his voice swallowed by the wind. "Spirit, come home!" Hours passed in a white hell of cold and exhaustion. Sam's feet went numb first, then his hands, despite the thick gloves Dorothy had knitted for him 20 Christmases ago. His breath came in ragged gasps that froze in his beard, and more than once he stumbled and fell in snow that was already knee-deep and growing deeper. It was his own voice that saved him, or perhaps Spirit's desperate need to answer it. Through the howling wind came a sound that made Sam's heart leap, the distinctive chirping call that Spirit used when he wanted attention. Not a roar or a growl, but the soft vocalization he'd developed specifically for communicating with his human family. Sam followed the sound through a maze of downed trees and snowdrifts until he found Spirit huddled in the shelter of a massive fallen pine. The mountain lion was shivering, his usual grace reduced to the clumsy movements of partial sedation and hypothermia. When he saw Sam, Spirit tried to stand but collapsed back into the snow, his blue-gray eyes dim with confusion and cold. "It's okay, boy," Sam whispered, pulling Spirit against his chest and wrapping them both in his emergency blanket. "I found you. I'm here." But even as he said the words, Sam knew the truth that Marcus had spoken. At 72, in a blizzard that was still hours from ending, he had perhaps signed both their death warrants. His cell phone had no signal, his supplies were limited, and hypothermia was already setting in for both of them. As man and mountain lion huddled together against the storm, Sam closed his eyes and thought of Dorothy, of Tommy, of all the choices that had led to this moment. If this was how it ended, at least Spirit wouldn't die alone and confused. At least they would face whatever came next together, as they had faced everything else. The snow continued to fall, and the wind continued to howl, and somewhere in the white wilderness, two unlikely souls clung to each other and waited for dawn. Death came to Samuel Mackenzie in the sterile quiet of Yellowstone Regional Medical Center, not in the howling wilderness where he had expected to meet it. The doctors called it acute myocardial infarction brought on by severe hypothermia and exhaustion. Sam called it the price of love. The rescue had come at dawn, when the storm finally exhausted itself and helicopter search teams could navigate the treacherous mountain terrain. They found Sam and Spirit exactly where hypothermia had claimed them, huddled together beneath the fallen pine. The old man's body curved protectively around the mountain lion who had become his son in everything but blood. Both were barely alive. Sam's core temperature had dropped to 89 degrees, his pulse so weak the paramedics initially thought they were recovering a corpse. Spirit fared better, his wild heritage and thick coat providing protection that Sam's 72-year-old frame couldn't match, but the partial tranquilizer dose combined with severe cold had left him unconscious and unresponsive. "Remarkable," Dr. Patricia Williams told Maggie as they stood outside Sam's ICU room. "Most men his age wouldn't have survived 30 minutes in those conditions. He lasted nearly 8 hours. The only thing that kept him alive was shared body heat from that mountain lion." Through the glass window, Maggie watched Sam sleep, his weathered hands pale against the white hospital sheets, monitors tracking the irregular rhythm of a heart that had been pushed beyond its limits. Outside in the parking lot, animal control officers maintained their vigil, waiting for him to wake so they could resume their interrupted capture of Spirit, who was recovering in the hospital's makeshift animal holding area. "He won't give up the cat," Maggie said quietly. "Even if it kills him, he won't let them take Spirit." Dr. Williams nodded grimly. "His heart can't take another shock like this, the stress of losing that animal. I'm not sure he'd survive it." The irony was crushing. Sam had risked everything to save Spirit from captivity, only to ensure that the mountain lion would end up caged anyway when his protector died. Love, it seemed, sometimes defeated itself through its very intensity. Marcus Volkov arrived that evening, his expensive suit looking out of place in the hospital's utilitarian waiting room. He found Maggie slumped in a plastic chair, exhaustion and grief written across her features like battle scars. "How is he?" Marcus asked. And for the first time since Maggie had known him, his voice held something resembling genuine concern. "Dying," she replied bluntly. "His heart is giving out. The doctors say he has maybe days, not weeks." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring through the window at the old man who had frustrated his plans for months. "I didn't want this," he said finally. "I wanted the land, yes, but not like this." "Then stop it," Maggie said, her voice raw with emotion. "Call off animal control. Let that man spend his last days with the only family he has left." "You don't understand," Marcus replied, but his protest lacked conviction. "There are legal issues, insurance liabilities, public safety concerns." "Bullshit," Maggie snapped, her composure finally cracking. "You wanted him gone so you could have his property. Well, congratulations. You're about to get exactly what you wanted. He'll be dead within the week and you can build your resort on his grave." The accusation hung between them like a physical barrier. Marcus stared at her, then at Sam's still form beyond the glass, and something shifted in his expression, a crack in the armor of ambition that revealed something unexpectedly human underneath. "There's something you don't know," he said quietly. "Something I should have told you months ago." Before Maggie could respond, alarms began shrieking from Sam's room. Through the window, they watched his body convulse as his heart monitor flatlined, the steady beep becoming one long, terrible tone. Medical staff rushed past them, shouting orders and wheeling equipment that looked more like instruments of torture than tools of healing. "Clear!" Dr. Williams shouted, pressing defibrillator paddles to Sam's chest. His body arched with the electrical shock, then fell still. "Nothing. Charging to 300. Clear." Another shock, another lifeless moment. The monitor remained flat, its accusing tone echoing through the hallway where Maggie stood, with tears streaming down her face, and Marcus Volkov wrestled with secrets that suddenly seemed more important than any business deal. "Come on, Sam," Dr. Williams muttered, administering CPR with the desperate efficiency of someone who had lost too many patients already. "Don't give up on me now." The third shock brought back a weak, irregular rhythm that made the medical team cheer softly. But the celebration was premature. Sam's vitals remained critically unstable, his body hovering on the knife's edge between life and death. "He's not responding to treatment," Dr. Williams told them an hour later, her scrubs stained with the evidence of her futile battle. "His heart has sustained too much damage. Without a miracle, he won't see morning." As if summoned by the doctor's words, a commotion erupted from the direction of the animal holding area. Spirit's distressed calls echoed through the hospital corridors. Not the typical mountain lion vocalizations that most people would expect, but the specific chirping, mewing sounds he used only when calling for Sam. The mountain lion had somehow sensed his human's crisis and was responding with vocalizations that sounded heartbreakingly like a lost child crying for his father. "That animal's been doing that for the past hour," a frustrated orderly told Dr. Williams. "Ever since the old man crashed, that cat won't stop making noise. It's upsetting the other patients." Maggie felt something break inside her chest. Even in their final moments, Sam and Spirit were calling to each other across the barriers that human law and medical protocol had erected between them. Love, it seemed, recognized no boundaries except those it chose to accept. "Let me see him," she said suddenly. "Let me see Spirit." "Ma'am, that's not—" "Please," she interrupted, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent 40 years studying wild animals. "That mountain lion is grieving. He knows his companion is dying and he's in distress. Let me assess his condition before you make any decisions about his future." The orderly, perhaps moved by the raw emotion in her voice, led her through sterile corridors to a converted storage room where Spirit paced behind hastily erected bars. The mountain lion looked up as she entered, his blue-gray eyes holding a depth of sorrow that challenged every scientific principle about animal emotion she had ever believed. "I know, boy," she whispered, kneeling beside the makeshift cage. "I know you want to see him. So do I." Spirit pressed against the bars, not trying to escape but seeking comfort from the one human he recognized as part of his extended family. His calls had quieted to soft chirps of distress, and Maggie noticed he kept turning toward the direction of Sam's room, as if his wild instincts could somehow navigate the maze of hospital corridors to reach his dying companion. "Ma'am," the orderly's voice was gentle. "Dr. Williams wants to see you. She says it's urgent." Maggie found the doctor standing outside Sam's room with an expression of barely controlled amazement. "In 40 years of medicine," Dr. Williams said, "I've never seen anything like this. His vitals started stabilizing about 10 minutes ago, right around the time you went to see that mountain lion. His heart rhythm is still weak, but it's regular. It's almost like—" "Like what?" "Like he's fighting to stay alive for something. Or someone." Through the window, Sam's eyes fluttered open for the first time in hours. His lips moved soundlessly, forming a single word that Maggie could read even without hearing. Spirit. The old man was dying, but he wasn't dead yet. And somewhere in the hospital's depths, a mountain lion continued his vigil, calling to the human who had saved him, loved him, and was now slipping away despite every medical intervention available. The question was whether love alone could bridge the gap between life and death, between human and wild, between the possible and the impossible. Time, as they say, would tell. The funeral of Samuel Mackenzie was meant to be a quiet affair, a simple goodbye for a man who had lived his life in the shadow of greater mountains and deeper forests. But word had spread through the tight-knit community of Yellowstone's seasonal workers, retired rangers, and local ranchers like wildfire through dry grass. By dawn on the appointed day, 200 people had gathered in the meadow beside Soda Butte Creek, where Sam had requested his ashes be scattered according to his handwritten will. Dr. Margaret Thompson stood at the makeshift podium constructed from hay bales and plywood, her prepared eulogy trembling in hands that had dissected the behavioral patterns of apex predators but couldn't steady themselves to honor the man who had become her dearest friend. She looked out over the sea of weathered faces, men and women who had worked alongside Sam, learned from him, respected the quiet integrity that had defined his 47 years of service. "Samuel Mackenzie," she began, her voice carrying across the meadow on the crisp November air, "was a man who understood that love sometimes requires us to break rules that were never meant to contain the human heart." In the front row, Marcus Volkov sat with his head bowed, expensive suit replaced by simple black clothing that didn't announce his wealth or ambitions. The transformation had begun 3 days earlier, when he'd finally revealed the secret that had driven him to Lamar Valley, not as a predatory developer, but as Michael Mackenzie, Sam's grandson, Tommy's son, carrying 15 years of hurt and misunderstanding that had curdled into revenge. The revelation had come in the hospital corridor, when Sam's heart monitor was singing its irregular song of imminent death. Michael, had broken down completely, the polished businessman dissolving into the broken boy who had stood at his father's military funeral and watched his grandfather turn away from the family's grief, walking alone into the wilderness rather than sharing their pain. "I thought he didn't care," Michael had confessed to Maggie through tears that washed away years of careful construction. "Dad was everything to me, and when he died, Grandpa just disappeared, left us to grieve alone while he went back to his precious mountains and his animals. I thought he loved them more than us." But the truth, as revealed through yellowed letters hidden in Sam's desk and bank records that told a different story, was heartbreakingly simple. Sam hadn't abandoned his family. He had sacrificed himself for their healing. Unable to bear being the reminder of their loss, knowing that his presence only deepened their pain by association with Tommy's choice to enlist, he had quietly arranged financial support through anonymous trusts while maintaining the physical distance he believed they needed. "He paid for my college," Michael had whispered, staring at documents that rewrote his entire understanding of his grandfather's love. "My law degree, my first business loan, all of it came from him, and I never knew. I spent 15 years hating him for abandoning us, and he was taking care of us all along." Now, as Maggie's eulogy painted a picture of Sam's gentle dedication to both human and animal welfare, Michael wrestled with the weight of his error. He had come to destroy the man who had actually spent decades protecting him from a distance, love expressed through sacrifice rather than presence. The service proceeded with the simple dignity Sam would have wanted. Old colleagues shared stories of his patience with rookie rangers, his uncanny ability to track wounded animals, his quiet heroism during flash floods and winter rescues that had saved dozens of lives over the decades. A bagpiper played Amazing Grace, with the haunting beauty that only comes from music echoing off mountain walls. But it was the unexpected moment, the one that would be discussed in hushed voices for years afterward, that transformed a simple funeral into something approaching the miraculous. The first roar came from the ridge overlooking the meadow, a sound so deep and powerful that it seemed to emanate from the earth itself. Conversations stopped mid-sentence as 200 heads turned toward the source, where a familiar figure stood silhouetted against the morning sky. Spirit had escaped. The mountain lion stood 90 pounds of wild dignity on the rocky outcropping, his tawny coat burnished gold in the early light, those impossible blue-gray eyes fixed on the gathering below with an intensity that made even seasoned wildlife professionals take involuntary steps backward. "Nobody move," Dr. Williams whispered, though her voice carried clearly in the sudden silence. Mountain lions are unpredictable in large groups. Any sudden motion could trigger an attack response. But Spirit's behavior defied every prediction, every assumption about wild animal psychology that the assembled crowd carried in their collective memory. Instead of the aggressive posturing or flight response they expected, the mountain lion began a careful descent toward the funeral gathering, his movements deliberate and somehow respectful. Maggie felt her breath catch as she recognized the specific way Spirit held himself, the posture he adopted when approaching Sam for affection, submissive yet confident, seeking connection rather than asserting dominance. This wasn't a predator stalking prey or a territorial animal defending resources. This was a son coming to say goodbye to his father. "Jesus Christ," someone whispered, as Spirit reached the edge of the crowd and continued walking, his path taking him directly toward the simple wooden casket that held Sam's remains. People pressed back to create a corridor, their faces reflecting a mixture of terror and awe, as 180 pounds of apex predator passed within arm's reach. Spirit approached the casket with the careful reverence of a mourner, his massive head lowered in what could only be described as a bow. He circled the wooden box once, twice, then stopped at its head and did something that brought tears to eyes that hadn't cried in decades. The mountain lion placed his paw gently on the casket lid and vocalized, not a roar or a growl, but the soft, chirping call he had used exclusively for communicating with Sam. The sound was heartbreaking in its clarity, a grief so pure and uncomplicated that it shamed the complex emotions of the human mourners surrounding him. "He's saying goodbye," Maggie whispered, her scientific training warring with the evidence of her own eyes. "He knows Sam is gone, and he's saying goodbye." But Spirit wasn't finished. With a movement so deliberate it seemed choreographed, he reached into the tall grass beside the casket and extracted something that made the entire crowd gasp. A single branch of white bark pine, heavy with cones, the kind that Sam had always collected for his bird feeders. The mountain lion placed this offering on the casket with the solemnity of a priest delivering communion. The gesture was impossible, unprecedented, and absolutely unmistakable in its meaning. Spirit had brought a gift for his human father, the kind of natural treasure that Sam had always valued above any material wealth. Michael Mackenzie broke first, great, gasping sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than his chest. The careful control he had maintained throughout the service shattered completely, as he watched an animal demonstrate the kind of pure love he had convinced himself his grandfather had never felt for their family. "I'm sorry," he cried, though whether to Sam's memory or to Spirit or to the universe in general was unclear. "God, I'm so sorry." Spirit turned at the sound of distress, his predator's instincts apparently recognizing something familiar in Michael's grief. The mountain lion padded over to the young man and did something that defied every principle of wild animal behavior. He pressed his massive head against Michael's shoulder in a gesture of comfort that was unmistakably learned from watching Sam console others over the years. The crowd watched in stunned silence as predator and prey species shared a moment of mutual grief, the mountain lion somehow understanding that this human's pain was connected to his own loss. It was a demonstration of emotional intelligence that challenged fundamental assumptions about the cognitive abilities of wild animals. "This is impossible," Dr. Williams murmured, but her voice held wonder rather than disbelief. "Mountain lions don't. they can't. Maybe they can, Maggie replied, her scientific worldview reshaping itself around the evidence of her own eyes. Maybe we've been wrong about a lot of things. As the sun climbed higher over the Lamar Valley, Spirit remained with the mourners for another 30 minutes, accepting gentle touches from those brave enough to approach, allowing children to pet his coat while their parents held their breath. He seemed to understand that this gathering was about Sam, that these humans were part of the extended family that had formed around his beloved companion. When he finally left, it was with the same dignity with which he had arrived, padding back toward the ridge with occasional glances over his shoulder, as if committing the faces of Sam's human family to memory. His final roar echoed across the valley like a benediction. And then he was gone, leaving behind 200 people who would spend the rest of their lives trying to explain what they had witnessed. But the story wasn't over. Because as the mourners prepared to leave, as Michael Mackenzie embraced his grandfather's friends and began the long process of understanding the man he had so catastrophically misjudged, a sound emerged from the casket that stopped every heart in the meadow. A muffled cough, then another, then a voice, weak but unmistakably alive. Did someone say my name? 6 months later, Samuel Mackenzie sat on the porch of what had once been his humble cabin and was now the centerpiece of the Mackenzie Wildlife Sanctuary, watching his grandson Michael teach his great-grandson David how to identify animal tracks in the soft earth beside Soda Butte Creek. The transformation still felt like a dream some mornings, the kind where you wake up grateful that reality had proven more generous than imagination. The medical explanation for Sam's resurrection had been prosaic enough, a rare condition called cataleptic coma brought on by severe hypothermia and cardiac trauma that mimicked death so completely even hospital equipment had been fooled. Dr. Williams called it a 1 in a million occurrence, the kind of medical anomaly that would be studied in textbooks for decades. Sam preferred the explanation his Crow neighbors offered. Sometimes the spirits aren't ready for a man to cross over, especially when his work on Earth remains unfinished. "Grandpa Sam!" 8-year-old David came running up the porch steps, his small face bright with excitement. "Dad showed me cougar prints by the creek, and they're huge. Do you think it's Spirit?" Sam smiled, ruffling the boy's sandy hair that reminded him so much of Tommy at that age. "Could be, kiddo. Spirit's been keeping an eye on things around here since I got back from the hospital, making sure we're all safe." It was true, though the reality of their ongoing relationship with the mountain lion remained a carefully managed secret. Officially, Spirit was a wild animal who had been successfully relocated to a remote section of the park after Sam's recovery made headlines across the country. Unofficially, the big cat visited the sanctuary almost daily, usually at dawn or dusk when curious tourists were less likely to witness his interactions with the Mackenzie family. The transformation of Marcus Volkov back into Michael Mackenzie had been as dramatic as his grandfather's return from the dead. The ambitious developer's entire business model had shifted overnight, from exploiting wilderness areas to protecting them. Mountain Vista Development became Mackenzie Conservation Solutions, specializing in ecotourism projects that preserved habitat while providing sustainable income for local communities. "Dad's taking me fishing tomorrow," David announced, climbing into Sam's lap with the confidence of a child who had never known anything but unconditional love. "He says you taught him how to catch trout when he was my age." "Did I now?" Sam chuckled. Though the memory was painful, he had taught Tommy those same skills in this same creek 30 years ago. The difference now was that he had been given an impossible second chance to share that knowledge with another generation. Michael emerged from the forest path carrying the expensive camera equipment that had replaced his business suits as the tools of his trade. Photography, it turned out, was another gift he had inherited from the Mackenzie line, though his grandfather had never known about Tommy's artistic talent because the boy had been too shy to share it before enlisting. "Got some incredible shots of the elk herd near Specimen Ridge," Michael said, settling onto the porch steps with the easy comfort of someone who had finally found his place in the world. "And you were right. Spirit was watching them from that rocky outcrop about 200 yards away. He's definitely establishing territory in that area." Dr. Margaret Thompson looked up from her laptop, where she was compiling her groundbreaking research on interspecies emotional bonding. At 69, she had found a second career that combined her scientific expertise with her personal experience of witnessing the impossible. The Mackenzie Wildlife Sanctuary had become her laboratory, and the data she was collecting was revolutionizing understanding of animal consciousness. "The journal wants to feature Spirit's story on the cover of next month's issue," she announced. "National Geographic is calling it the most significant documentation of mountain lion emotional intelligence ever recorded." "Just make sure you protect his location," Sam cautioned. "Fame's the last thing that cat needs. He's got enough to deal with being a single father." It was the latest development that had surprised them all. 3 months earlier, Spirit had appeared at the sanctuary with a female mountain lion and 2 cubs in tow. A family unit that defied everything wildlife biologists thought they knew about cougar social behavior. The cats had established a territory that encompassed the sanctuary and the surrounding wilderness, creating an unprecedented example of wild predators coexisting peacefully with human activities. "Speaking of Spirit," Michael said, checking his watch, "it's almost sunset. David, you want to help me set up the trail cameras for tonight?" The boy's eyes lit up with the kind of excitement that only comes from sharing adventures with beloved adults. "Can we see if Spirit brings his babies again?" "Cubs, not babies," Sam corrected gently. "And yes, if we're very quiet and very lucky, we might see the whole family." As grandfather, father, and son worked together to position the motion-activated cameras that would document the mountain lion's nocturnal activities, Sam reflected on the strange turns his life had taken. A year ago, he had been a lonely old man waiting to die. Now he was the patriarch of a family that included not only blood relatives but also a renowned scientist, a thriving conservation business, and a mountain lion who still greeted him with the chirping calls of their early days together. The financial problems that had once threatened to destroy everything had evaporated as completely as morning mist. Michael's conservation company was thriving, generating income through wildlife photography tours, educational programs, and consulting work for other eco-tourism projects. The Mackenzie Wildlife Sanctuary was entirely debt-free, with an endowment that would ensure its survival for generations. More importantly, the emotional distances that had separated the Mackenzie men for 15 years had been bridged by grief transformed into understanding. Michael now knew the truth about his grandfather's absence after Tommy's death. Not abandonment, but a sacrifice born of love, a withdrawal motivated by the belief that his presence only deepened the family's pain. "I understand now why you stayed away," Michael had told Sam during one of their long conversations about the past. "You thought we blamed you for Dad's choice to enlist." "You were trying to protect us from more hurt. Your grandmother needed to grieve without seeing my face every day," Sam had replied. "Every time she looked at me, she saw the man who'd taught Tommy to love the outdoors, to be brave, to serve something bigger than himself. I thought it was kinder to let her heal without those reminders." "But we needed you," Michael had said simply. "Especially me. I was 8 years old, and I needed my grandfather." The healing had been gradual, built through shared mornings in the wilderness, through stories about Tommy that transformed him from a source of pain into a celebration of life lived fully. David's presence had accelerated the process. Grandchildren, Sam discovered, were nature's antidote to regret, their innocent joy forcing adults to focus on creating new memories rather than mourning old ones. As twilight painted the sky in shades of gold and purple, the mountain lions appeared on schedules. Spirit led his small family down from their daytime resting place in the high rocks, moving with the fluid grace that never failed to take Sam's breath away. The cubs, now 6 months old and nearly as large as their mother, tumbled over each other in play while their parents maintained vigilant watch for any threats. "There," Sam whispered, pointing toward the meadow where the cats had stopped to drink from the creek. "See how Spirit positions himself upwind? He's scenting for danger while his family drinks. That's learned behavior, something he picked up from watching me protect you kids." David pressed against his great-grandfather's side, eyes wide with wonder at the sight of wild predators moving with such trust through their shared territory. "Will they always live here, Grandpa Sam?" "As long as we give them reason to trust us," Sam replied. "Wild things aren't much different from people, kiddo. They stay where they feel safe and loved." The mountain lions finished drinking and began their evening hunt, moving like shadows through the tall grass. Spirit paused at the edge of the clearing and looked back toward the porch where his human family watched. For a moment, their eyes met across the species divide, and Sam felt the same connection that had sustained them both through the darkest periods of their lives. "Thank you," Sam whispered, though whether to Spirit, to the universe, or to the second chance that had allowed him to repair the damage of a lifetime, he couldn't say. As the family gathered on the porch to share dinner and stories, as Michael's camera captured images that would inspire conservation efforts around the world, as David fell asleep in his great-grandfather's arms with the security of a child who had never known anything but love, the mountain lions continued their ancient dance of survival in the wilderness beyond. The Mackenzie Wildlife Sanctuary would endure for generations, a testament to the truth that love, between humans, between species, between the possible and the impossible, could bridge any divide when expressed with enough courage and faith. In the distance, Spirit's roar echoed across the valley, no longer a sound of grief, but a declaration of territory, family, and home. Some stories, Sam thought as he carried his sleeping great-grandson inside, were too important to end. Sometimes the deepest wounds in our hearts come not from what we've lost, but from what we've misunderstood. Samuel Mackenzie's story reminds us that love doesn't always look the way we expect it to. Sometimes it appears as distance when we need closeness, as silence when we crave words, as sacrifice when we hunger for presence. How many of us have carried the weight of believing someone didn't care, only to discover years later that their love was expressed in ways we couldn't see at the time? The bond between Sam and Spirit teaches us that it's never too late for second chances, never too late to heal the fractures in our families, never too late to choose understanding over resentment. Michael spent 15 years hating his grandfather for abandoning him, only to learn that Sam had been protecting and providing for him all along, love disguised as absence, care expressed through sacrifice. As we navigate our own relationships with children, grandchildren, and estranged family members, Spirit's loyalty reminds us that the deepest connections transcend time, misunderstanding, and even species. True love always finds its way home. What family relationship in your life might benefit from a second look? Have you ever discovered that someone's love was there all along, just expressed differently than you expected? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what another reader needs to hear today.